All right, welcome back, dear listeners, to another exciting episode from Pixnar AI, your podcast series on machine learning in AI applications, and this time in the health tech AI space. As the as promised by your host Rabu Banga, today we have an interesting conversation, and we have invited a guest, the co-founder and CEO of Rhino Health, Mr. Itai Dayan, and we are thrilled to have him join us. The main focus of today's conversation will be around emerging technologies from in the health tech AI space. So we'll be talking about Rhino Health platform and how it helps developers and researchers across the academic here, institutions, and industries to analyze the data, create AI models, and deploy them. Everything you would do on centralized data, but without the need to share or migrating. As always, you'll find more interesting information at the end of the podcast. So sit back, relax, and enjoy the conversation.
All right, welcome to our Extra AI podcast series. Today, I have an interesting conversation about emerging AI and ML applications in the healthcare space. And I have the honor of inviting the co-founder and CEO of Rhino Health, Mr. Itai Dayan. Welcome on board, Mr. Itai. Could you provide a brief introduction or a background from your end?
Sure. So, Raghu, thank you for inviting me. My background is in clinical medicine. After practicing medicine in Israel, I joined Boston Consulting Group's healthcare practice and work across Middle East, Western Europe, and North America, and some work in Asia Pacific. Ended up joining the Mass General Brigham Center for Clinical Data Science, which I subsequently led, and ran the first large-scale federated learning project on real-world data from 20 different hospitals, which was published in Nature Medicine around a year and a half ago. And that is what excited me about starting a federated learning as a platform company.
Amazing. And it's awesome to know that you have experience and you around the globe and then coming and starting this firm back in Boston. Great to know that. So how I do in our podcast sessions to ease our audience into the podcast conversation, I come up with a teaser question and maybe you can answer it in a different way. What is that one particular AI or ML experience that has changed your life, or that you have noticed how things got better compared to what it were in the past? You can speak any personal or professional experience, and then we can get started.
Yeah, so we already use a lot of machine learning applications around us when we search for things online, when we order products, when we receive personalized advertisements. When we receive warning that our car is maybe getting too close to the sidewalk and stuff like that. Something that's relatively recent, I think, is the advent of opening ChatGPT. Whereas as a person who speaks English as a foreign language, I'd say that has made my writing media bits and contributions to articles way faster, both in terms of providing prompts as well as reviewing my grammar and writing style. So definitely that's been a big advantage. I'm not as convinced that this will, create such a massive disruption or revolution or, whatever people will think it will be, because it still has a long way to go.
Right.
But I think many companies have a potential of embedding these chat capabilities in their products and definitely, saving some cycles and delivering a better user experience.
Amazing and great experience. I believe I completely agree with you. Definitely, there is a long way to go, but I think, like you mentioned, for foreign language speakers, foreign language speakers like English, it greatly helps in putting together your statements or when you're writing, publishing for the articles. Amazing.
Sure. By the way, the best use I've heard so far is from somebody who tends to answer passive aggressive responses to emails. So he uses ChatGPT as a way to tone down his language when he's feeling a bit upset about the message he got. I thought that was brilliant.
Yeah, amazing. Yeah, true. I really agree with that. Yeah. So let us now get into this interesting conversation. And amazingly, this is my first podcast in the healthcare space as well, getting into the health tech industry about the influence of AI and ML. So before we get there, I think, Itai, I think, I know you have been all around the globe. Would you explain your emigrating experience from Israel to Boston and founding this tech company? Maybe a little bit personal background and the journey that is involved here, because there are some exciting things that we want to talk.
Yeah, sure thing. So I moved here in mid 2016. It was with a relocation package, and kind of like I wouldn't say it was the most, like onerous moving experience. It's still definitely a meaningful kind of like life event. And once you've moved here, then you're no longer the foreigner who comes to America for work, but you're the foreigner who lives in America for work, and you're seen in a bit of a different light. The expectations are a bit different. American bureaucracy is sometimes overwhewming, even for people who've moved from relatively bureaucratic countries like Israel and many places in Europe. At least that was my experience. But after you kind of get your act together and settle in a bit, you can definitely see that there's just so much going on, especially in a place like Boston.
Awesome. So good to know that, Itai. So let us now maybe get into our main conversation here. So before getting into talking about the healthcare space, could you provide your thoughts around how all these AI projects are getting implemented, a big picture overview, and then we can dive into the healthcare space.
Yeah, so I'll talk maybe a bit more about kind of like the medical AI clinical applications. There's all sorts of solutions for healthcare. Some of them are more on the administrative side and are a bit more similar to other industries. And I'd say that differences that I've seen in implementing AI projects in medical AI versus other fields is, first of all, you typically work on much smaller data sets because data is just less available. Having quality of data and quality of annotation is a much bigger challenge in comparison to other spaces. And kind of like building a minimal viable model is much harder. So you can't kind of like just take some, off the shelf models and retrain or fine tune them. You need to typically get much more creative, especially since most of the roles of these models are either for diagnosis or for triaging patients. And so you ultimately need to have a model that's actually fairly performant. And it's actually harder to move a needle when I'd say that than in other spaces. In that regard, and so the development process can actually be fairly extended. Lastly, there's a big kind of like kink in the chain between developing a model and deploying it. Typically, when in other spaces you develop a model, you deploy it, you receive results, you fine-tune the model, etc., etc. in healthcare, and I've really seen that, firsthand from, leading the development and deployment of AI at Mass General Brigham System, alongside many industry partners, is that you need to go for FDA. You need to embed the product in a device. That device, could be a software device, needs to itself be implemented in multiple hospitals. Each place where the device would be implemented is different workflow, different patients, different protocols. And so the ability to iterate and kind of like refine your assumptions in later stages of development is much lower in comparison to other spaces. And as I said, you ultimately need to deliver much more value for it to be actually meaningful. If it's something that's gives you reasonable results, but doesn't really improve the workflow of a clinician, or doesn't really provide something that is close to human or superhuman capabilities in diagnostics, it can be nice to have, but it won't really make a dent.
Right.
And the cost of using tools and the cost of training new users to use tools is actually quite substantial.
Right.
All alongside the fact that AI is still not a proven technology in healthcare.
Right.
I mean, you could say everybody, AI is here, AI is raising adoption. Some people even speculated that around a third of US radiologists brush in with AI somehow, but it's still not like a standard accepted technology, and many people question its viability yet.
Right.
Yeah, and so kind of like the bar of proof and the bar of skepticism is still pretty high.
Right. So, yeah, I agree with what you said. When the way these AI or ML projects or technology being implemented in the healthcare space is a bit different when compared to the other domains, like whether it is a retail space or a commercial space, because there the amount of iteration in the data is kind of little different. And here, I think the patient's data and the data privacy related issues are much more bigger. Let us take one step back. I want to go into the aspect of the emerging AI and ML applications in the overall medicine and healthcare technology, or in the healthcare space. Could you put some additional thoughts behind that? Like, where are we coming in from and where are we going, or some high-level thoughts?
So I think that the usage of AI to improve clinical operations, like triaging patients and optimizing workflows, is already pretty substantial. While, again, skepticism and need to overcome barriers, I think we're going into a much bigger usage of AI for actual diagnosis, and especially in areas where AI can really make a dent, like the usage of digitized pathology scans, like the usage of multimodal data from multiple sources in order to support clinical decision support, and things of that nature.
Beautiful. Beautiful. I like the way you have addressed that challenges. Maybe let us take a quick break, come back, and I want to kind of get into the aspects of patient privacy and health when we come back and we talk about it. All right, welcome back. So we are getting into an interesting conversation about the emerging AI and ML applications in the healthcare space. So, Mr. Etai, I think I would like to now ask, I want to get a bit more into the aspects of how you can leverage AI and ML to improve both patient privacy and the health as such, since we are talking about these aspects.
Yeah, so I mean, it's a bit of an original question, because usually people ask more about how can AI be used against patient privacy or compromises patient privacy, so
Right.
to speak. I have actually seen some examples of ways to detect, to ensure compliance and detect when somebody opens like a patient record and reads stuff, even if they shouldn't. So it was like a startup company called Protenus that does that. And there's all sorts of other ways to protect against cyber attacks and, things of that nature. Overall, I'd say that AI in medicine does introduce risks to patient privacy. Alongside, again, a lot of value in terms of outcomes and improving operations and, many other things. Much of it, and that's actually an area that's becoming more complex over time, given that there's more leverage of multimodal data and more sensitive data. If we're kind of like going back a few years where the main use of AI was of medical imaging, that by itself did have some risk, but less so than when you combine imaging with pathology, with genetics, with kind of like much more accurate thumbprints of patients. And you actually get to the point where even if a specific privacy of a specific patient isn't compromised, you're still kind of like risking that person's rights, maybe. Like an AI algorithm that maybe detects some sort of like potential delinquency of payments, or an AI model that identifies a patient who's likely to be sick and uses that in some sort of an inadvertent way to deny coverage or to slow down the scheduling of appointments. One of the algorithms that we were actually developing in my previous life was around improving hospital operations and scheduling. And one of the lookouts we had to take while developing the algorithm is the fact that the more you identify no-shows, for example, and try to schedule patients on a risk basis, you may actually deteriorate the SLA of patients from lower socioeconomic statuses. So you're a person from a low SES background, so what? You still want to come to your appointment and not meet 5 people who are, like booked at the same time you are, because other people have a tendency to not show up. And so that was like one of the risks that, we had to mitigate there. And so I'd say there's a lot of kind of like ways where people can actually be targeted, especially when many of the AI are heuristics, where you don't exactly, the ability to control against biases, whether it's, societal biases, legal biases, data biases, observer biases, etc., are often quite limited.
Okay. That is interesting, the way I think you have put it about the biases when working with the patient data and the privacy, the data privacy aspects. I believe so with having these diverse data, the thought is that you will also provide some better health outcomes. Is that what you're kind of bringing home the point? And maybe could you elaborate a bit more why this can lead to better outcomes?
I think it's in many ways. Some of them come from reducing the cost of care delivery. Some of them come from improving earlier diagnosis of patients with diseases. Some of them come from making smarter decisions on patients while a patient has been identified, reducing time to treatment and time-sensitive scenarios. There's kind of like been, uses across the whole gamut. I think that, as I said earlier, there's a shift between things that are kind of like simpler and more operationally focused into things that are more diagnostic focused and treatment guidance. And I think that's ultimately where I think AI is going to deliver value across many use cases, but I think that's going to be kind of like the claim to fame of AI. ultimately, rather than just improving clinical workflow, order of reading results or seeing patients. These are, of course, very important as well.
Sure. Okay. So here, okay, let us now take this a bit further. I want to understand, like, how are you tackling these algorithmic bias and these different medical inequalities and inequities, right? And maybe in this healthcare space, where what has more impact on the performance of an AI algorithm, the model itself or the data? Because here data quality means what does exactly the data quality means here in the aspect of healthcare, and how can you achieve the right level of data quality in this field?
Yeah, so the issue about data quality is not a new one, and it was kind of like the famous common saying of garbage in, garbage out with models. I think healthcare is a bit different because it's hard to get high quality labeled data. And if you've labeled data for one purpose, it doesn't mean it's already labeled for another purpose. So kind of gaining economies of scale was not that easy. And also you can have different human readers labeling data in different ways as well. So the fact that you've labeled the data coming from hospital X in a certain way doesn't mean that the clinician from hospital Y would label it the same way. The other clinician had labeled it. There's also a lot of characteristics of the data itself. People kind of say, oh, it was like an X-ray data or a CAT scan or an MRI. Well, in fact, each one of these have hundreds, sometimes thousands of different protocols and machine types and all sorts of permutations. So just kind of like saying, okay, like I need 1,000 MRI scans to develop a model. That's usually like not exactly what you need. You need to get a bit more, specific. And it also often dictates how the model itself will actually work while it's, kind of being deployed in the wild. I think it's no secret that FDA is evolving its guidelines today in order to meet more sophisticated medical devices than in the past, and the kind of a regulation that worked for medical devices in the past doesn't necessarily fit AI. Proving that your AI model works in 2, 3, 4 hospitals doesn't necessarily mean it's going to work in another 1,000 hospitals because of all the permutations and unique characteristics of data. There's also sorts of issues around unexpected events where the data itself is out of the distribution of what was used to train the model and what will the AI predict then. And I'd say we're pretty far in that sense from what people kind of coin as autonomous AI, that kind of like decides how you are to be treated and kind of like take the human outside of the loop. I would, rather than kind of saying, do you need more diverse data or do you need more validation data? I would just say you need more data.
Okay.
Today, when you develop an AI algorithm, and you have maybe a validation set of 1,000 cases, that's pretty good. If you have a training set of 2,000 cases, that's also pretty good. My co-founder joined me after working in Google, and he was like, what? Like in Google, we trained algorithms on billions of data points, not on like, hundreds of data points or like a few thousand. That's kind of a telling sign, of how healthcare in some ways is so leading the charge, and in some ways is still like kind of held back. And so you need access to more data. You need more access to more data when training, when validating. You need more access to more data when deploying. One of the limitations today is when you deploy an AI model, it's actually kind of hard to say whether the algorithm did good or not. Because the algorithm itself would, let's say, predict that you have a certain volume of a lymph node, or counts how many enlarged lymph nodes a patient has. A clinician doesn't necessarily count 25 lymph nodes. It says, enlarged lymph nodes. So was the model right? Was the model wrong? Where do you put the cutoffs? None of these are really trivial questions. What even makes this further more complicated is that there isn't really a longitudinal view to most of the AI solutions. So let's say the algorithm predicted that you have cancer. I'll be a bit simplistic here. And a month afterwards, a biopsy result came back and said that you do indeed have cancer. Will that be available to the model vendor? Will it not? How timely would it be? How would we define it? One of the patients was transferred to another center in order to do the biopsy. Kind of getting all these things is pretty complicated. And one of the reasons that it's so complicated is because we're still in an economy of a lot of data transfers.
Right.
You train a model often by sending somebody data, and you want to redact the data and send as little as you want in order to reduce your risk as a healthcare provider. Then the model is trained and deployed back into a clinical workflow. So now you have some sort of an edge device that anonymizes medical imaging data. In the case of medical imaging, at least, sends the pixels to a cloud, the cloud environment where the vendor's system is set up. It runs an inference, provides back a result. The vendor himself actually knows quite little about the broader clinical context of how the AI is deployed.
Right.
And this is kind of where the whole federated learning concept comes into play, where you can keep models, training, inference, testing, and all that much closer to the data itself. And by that, you can actually get more latitude and get more knowledgeness of the model's performance and the environment in which it's being deployed. There is today, I'd say, much more push for getting that because of the need for more data diversity and because of not just data diversity, but also using data types that are more niche, more nuanced, more patchy. Like using histopathology data, using genetics data, using things that are not necessarily kind of like very easy to obtain. You're looking for specific kinds of rare diseases, cancers, subtypes, which are not that, common. And you usually want to develop things which are relevant to the most cutting edge diagnostics and cutting edge therapeutics. But that also means that the abundance of data for these is just less common.
Right.
Yeah. And so that's already pushing much more of a need of building federated data systems. But I'd also say that this will ultimately require some sort of not just like, will also require some additional upside coming from the regulator. Like, for example, providing more clear guidance on how continuously evolving models can run. Something that would really incentivize you to, not just look for gaps and in your model's performance, but also having the tools to action against it and improve a model.
Right. So you rightly at the right time, I think you brought this concept of federated learning, right, which will enable to access these large or more diverse data sets so that you can definitively, like with the example that you are mentioning, you can definitively predict, like in these patients, maybe possible outcomes. So could you elaborate a bit more on how this federated learning is enabling to access and get this large amount of diverse data sets, which is helping you in preparing for better outcomes?
Yeah, so I'd say ultimately more data, more diverse data. Federated learning helps you reduce the barrier for data collaborations, both in academia and in industry. It allows competitors or, maybe not enemies, but frenemies, as well as friends, collaborate on areas where each one's data is not sufficient. Right. And we've seen in the past several years, more pharma companies building consortia with each other's clinical trial data, early development and discovery data in order to reach kind of like a common good. And I think that by reducing these barriers and improving trust between different collaborators, federated learning actually has quite a big role to play.
Beautiful. I think amazing. So let us do one thing, Itai. I think I would like to take a quick break. I think there's a lot of concept and a lot of information that we have already discussed. I would like to take a quick break, give the audience a bit time to digest this, and then come back and get into how Rhino Health is playing a big role here. So we get into that aspects. All right, welcome back. We have been having some interesting conversation, and we did talk about the different aspects of having large and diverse data sets, the algorithm bias, and also we talked about how to handle medical inequalities and inequities. We talked about all these concepts and also about the federated learning, how it helps here. So, Mr. Itai, I think now comes to the interesting part, right? The $1 million question. How does Rhino Health play a big role in the AI ML space, and how is it different from the competitors?
Yeah, so Rhino Health is a platform provider that provides edge compute, federated learning being kind of a private example of this edge compute to support all of the healthcare vertical. I think it's pretty different in the sense that we don't require you to go into business with us on your data. It doesn't require, we don't take any claims on intellectual property. And our focus is really as a deep tech company that delivers a platform. And so if you kind of compare us to companies that are not competitive, but are maybe influential, then I'd put companies like cloud companies. We are in a way an edge cloud. Other companies like Data Robot and the ML Ops space, weights and biases, Databricks to some extent. None of these are directly competitive with us, but these are definitely companies that we take inspiration from. And by providing an end-to-end edge compute-based platform, we allow people to collaborate much more seamlessly, move models and move computation around rather than having to move data, which is a slow, costly, and risky process. And in that regard, really turbocharge the development and deployment of AI. And so that's what we see our role in the healthcare AI space.
Great. I like the aspects of how you have explained like how Rhino Health provides this platform for this end-to-end play here.
Yeah, I have a friend who was a programmer who then moved into studied medicine and now is in kind of like the medical field. He used our software once, even when it was much, much earlier. And he said, wow, this isn't something you typically see in the products geared towards healthcare. It looks like some people from like Google and from like other industries build it. And I said, yeah, that's exactly what it is. And so we're really priding ourselves on being able to translate novel and impactful technologies into the healthcare space, while really focusing on the healthcare space and really understanding the experience and needs and the unmet needs of the healthcare AI practitioners.
Beautiful. Before we get into the future of AI with medical science, do you want to provide any example or any particular, we don't need to go into any specifics of any customer example, but I think, do you want to provide any example for the audience so that they can connect all these dots here?
For the use of Rhino Health platform?
Yes.
Yeah, so we've launched, we've supported efforts from going into predicting which patients will need the next line of therapy for cancer on broad populations across the US, to collaborations on early prediction of pancreatic cancer using medical imaging from patients who their doctors didn't know at the time that they have pancreatic cancer, into federated data masking and kind of like adding even additional layers of safety and privacy, into using eye scans for all sorts of purposes. So there's really many, opportunities across the gamut. I'd say most of our projects are on fairly nuanced and novel data. if it's kind of like an X-ray of a knee, and people have already kind of traded that quite a bit, and nothing against the knees, but alone that's a pretty easy data to get hold of, and so we often touch on stuff that's more nuanced, sophisticated, and again multimodal. Yeah, so these are just some examples for things we're doing, and I think you've maybe asked me earlier about a question about, will AI ultimately replace basic delivery of healthcare? And I'd say in the very long run, it's hard to tell. There's, entire professions that's been replaced by SaaS and, solutions and such. But I'd say the healthcare workflow is so diverse, and there's so many different workflows for every single, medical practitioner, that I doubt it whether doctors are going to be outside a job in the upcoming years. I think there's going to be doctors who will use AI as increasingly in order to make themselves more accurate, more productive, reduce stress and burnout. So there's definitely going to be a lot of benefits from it. I don't see the near term where doctors will just, be unemployed by AI. And I'm not really sure if it's going to be something in the much longer period. I think there's a certain kind of a bit of Luddite approach to AI, where people kind of see it as something very different from any other medical technology that came before that. But it's kind of saying, well, you don't want to, you want to take out your microscope and look at the blood smear and count the number of cells on the blood smear rather than send it to a cytometer. So I think this will ultimately be another very influential and transformative technology, like we've seen dozens of come out in the last 50 years of medicine.
Right. No, that I completely agree with you. I think, of course, AI and ML, at least in the near future, will not be replacing any of these, but I think will definitely help improve in getting the tasks done much better. And what better, how it can do in the healthcare space is much more important for the common use. I think this is where I think maybe you could provide some since you've been in this field and you've been working on this with this your startup. What do you think is the future of AI with medical science? I know you briefly talked about it, but what do you envision going from here?
Expansion of the use of, additional rigor around the monitoring and quality of, and much more creativity and expansion in terms of the use case when going more into the diagnostic and clinical decision support realm than the kind of workflow operations alone. That's what I'd say, but I don't think it's too much of an original thought. I think it's where the market is going to. I'd like to also see AI going into the route that lab-developed tests went in pathology, where clinical practitioners and scientists are more involved in creating and deploying solutions soup to nuts, rather than kind of assuming that those vendors will take care of everything. Right. And I think that will also help accelerate the number of solutions in the market and the coverage of AI, so to speak. Especially since it seems like a lot of the kind of low-hanging fruit have already been picked, and many of the other ones are going to have to be driven in the most cost-efficient development way by practitioners, by scientists, and kind of not go outside completely the current paradigm of product development.
Beautiful. All right. It was great talking with you, Mr. Itai. I think we discussed quite a lot of different things about how AI and ML applications in the healthcare space. Thank you for your time.
Thank you so much. It's been a pleasure to be hosted on your podcast, and I'm looking forward to keeping track of the Extra AI podcast. Thanks again.
Okay. Thank you.
All right, let us now wrap up this podcast number 47. We would like to extend our heartfelt thanks to our esteemed guest from Rhino Health, Mr. Itai Dial, for sharing his valuable insights and expertise with us today. It's been an engaging and informative conversation, and we truly appreciate the time he has taken to be with us. I also want to thank our host, Mr. Raghu Banda, for steering this fascinating discussion. During the podcast conversation, you notice the various aspects that were discussed around Rhino Health platform, including its use of AI and machine learning to improve diagnostics, treatment, and patient care. We also noticed how the Rhino Health platform enables early detection of diseases, increases the accuracy of diagnosis, and tailors treatment plans to individual patients' needs. Mr. Dan also shared his vision for the future of AI in healthcare and how Rhino Health plans to contribute to that future. I hope you found it useful and interesting. If you have any further questions, you can directly reach out to Mr. Itai Dayan, since our host, Raghu Banda, will be tagging him on the LinkedIn post as well as the Rhino Health team. Alternatively, you could also reach out to the host, Mr. Raghu Banda, on his LinkedIn handle, Raghu Banda, or on his Twitter handle, RK Banda. Or you could even directly reach out on his website, extraai.com, xtrawai.com, where you will find many more interesting and fascinating conversations, extracting the raw AI conversations with different guests around the globe. Feel free to provide any feedback, or if you would like to hear many more interesting conversations or topics from different domains or different fields. Finally, a big thank you to you all, our wonderful audience, for tuning in and joining us on this journey into the world of health tech AI space, which is one of the first conversations in the health tech AI space. We hope you found this episode insightful and thought-provoking. Stay tuned for more interesting conversations in our Extra AI podcast series, where we'll continue to dive and delve into the most innovative technologies that are shaping our world. So until then, have a good morning, good afternoon, or good evening whenever you're tuning in or dialing in from. Happy predicting the future with AI technologies. Thank you, and bye-bye now.